Imagine a small town in South Carolina. It's November. The leaves are turning, there's a chill in the air, and you're heading to your favorite motorcycle shop. You're expecting the usual sounds, the rumble of engines, friendly banter. But as you get closer, it's just silence. Eerie silence. This is the scene that unfolded at Superbike Motorsports back in 2003, a place that went from vibrant and full of life to a scene of unimaginable horror in an instant. This is the story of the Superbike murders, a case that baffled investigators for over a decade.
What's both fascinating and frustrating about this case is how such a seemingly straightforward crime scene turned into a puzzle with so many dead ends. Four people brutally murdered Scott Ponder, the owner, his mother, Beverly Guy, Brian Lucas, the service manager, and Chris Schubert, one of the mechanics. All shot execution style, leaving investigators grasping at straws for a motive, a suspect, anything that could make sense of this senseless act.
It's hard to imagine the sheer terror of that day. This shop, usually bustling, especially with Scott and his wife Melissa, excitedly expecting their first child, turned into a crime scene forever marked by tragedy. A chilling reminder of how quickly life can change.
And the initial lack of evidence was truly perplexing. No signs of robbery, no DNA, no usable fingerprints, just 18 shell casings and a half-filled bill of sale. Not much to go on.
It sounds like they were starting from scratch.
Yeah.
So where did they even begin? What was their first big break in the case?
Well, their first lead would turn out to be a major stumble. They did a DNA test on Scott's newborn son, Scotty, and it pointed to Brian Lucas, Scott's employee and friend, as the father. This naturally shifted suspicion onto Melissa Scott's widow. They thought they had their motive, a love triangle, gone wrong.
It's heartbreaking to think about what Melissa must have been going through, losing her husband and then being thrown into the center of the investigation, accused of infidelity at such a vulnerable time.
Absolutely, and this is where the lack of thorough investigation really becomes apparent. Fixated on this assumed motive, investigators honed in on Melissa, potentially overlooking other crucial leads and possible suspects. And then their case crumbled even further when Melissa, adamant about her fidelity, demanded a retest of those DNA samples. Turns out the samples were mislabeled, clearing Melissa's name, yes, but also severely damaging the investigation's credibility.
So not only was Melissa unjustly targeted, but this mix-up also set back the entire investigation, delaying justice for the victims and their families. It's truly devastating. What happened after this DNA debacle? Did investigators broaden their scope?
You'd think so, right? But they remain strangely fixated on this arbitrary 3-month window before the murders, only focusing on those who might have had reason to target the victims during that specific time frame. Even more troubling, they essentially dismissed a list of potential suspects with criminal records that a private investigator hired by Brian Lucas's parents had put together.
So we have a mishandled crime scene, a grieving widow falsely accused, and investigators seemingly clinging to a limited view despite evidence pointing elsewhere. It's hard not to feel frustrated for the families left with so many unanswered questions and a system that seems to have failed them. How long does this go on before there was any kind of progress in the case?
Sadly, the Superbike murders went cold. For 13 long years, the case remained unsolved, leaving the families to grapple with their grief and the unanswered questions that haunted them. But just when all hope seemed lost, a seemingly unrelated case in 2016 unexpectedly breathed new life into the Superbike investigation.
A new case. 13 years later. This is where things get really interesting. Let's dive into that in part 2 of our deep dive.
Picture this. It's Labor Day weekend 2016. A young couple, Kayla Brown and Charlie Carver, vanish in Anderson, South Carolina, not too far from where that motorcycle shop was. They were last seen heading to a property owned by Todd Colehep, a seemingly average real estate agent who had hired Kayla to do some cleaning.
So on the surface, this feels like a totally separate case. How did investigators even connect these missing persons to the Superbike murders?
Well, it's a chilling chain of events that played out over months. Kayla and Charlie's families were desperate for answers, and suspicion quickly fell on Colehep, especially since Kayla had mentioned going to his property for work. After 2 agonizing months with no leads, investigators finally got a search warrant for Colehep's property.
Search warrant? For those who might not know, it's basically a legal document that gives law enforcement permission to search a specific place for evidence related to a crime. In this case, it turned out to be a game changer. What did they find on Colehep's property?
What they found was like something out of a nightmare, guns, lots of them scattered around the property. Right away, it was clear something sinister was going on. But the true horror of the situation unfolded when they heard a woman's screams coming from inside a locked shipping container.
Inside that container, they found Kayla Brown chained up, held captive in this makeshift prison. It's a truly horrific discovery, and it makes you wonder, how did she survive for so long in such unimaginable conditions?
Kayla's survival is a testament to her strength, her quick thinking, and her will to live. She later revealed that she actually witnessed Cole Hepp shoot and kill Charlie Carver shortly after they arrived at the property. To survive, she had to play a dangerous game convincing Cole Hepp that she cared for him, earning his trust just enough to avoid the same fate as Charlie. A truly remarkable story of survival against all odds.
It's heartbreaking to think of what this poor woman endured of months of captivity and unimaginable trauma. But in a way, Kayla's strength and resilience were what finally broke the Superbike case open. Didn't she reveal some crucial information to the authorities?
Absolutely. As Kayla was being rescued, she told the investigators something that sent chills down their spines. She said Cole Hepp had confessed to her about walking into a motorcycle shop years ago and shooting 4 people. It was a bombshell that suddenly connected this seemingly unrelated case to the cold case that had haunted the community for over a decade.
Wow, what a twist. A missing couple, a horrifying discovery on a remote property, and then a direct link to a cold case. It's like something you'd see in a movie. So what happened next? Did Cole Hepp confess to the Superbike murders?
With Cole Hepp in custody, the truth started to unravel, and it was even more gruesome than anyone could have imagined. He confessed to the murders of Kayla and Charlie, but also to the murders of another couple, Megan and Johnny Coxey. He had lured them to his property a year earlier under the pretense of offering them work.
So we start to see a pattern emerging. Cole Hepp using his job as a real estate agent to prey on vulnerable people, offering them work as a way to gain their trust and lure them into his web of deceit. And in the case of the Superbike murders, what was his explanation for those killings?
Cole Hepp tried to play the victim card. He claimed he had been humiliated by the employees at Superbike during a previous visit, suggesting the murders were revenge for a stolen motorcycle.
Revenge for a stolen motorcycle. That seems like a pretty weak justification for such a brutal act. Was there any truth to his claims?
His story fell apart pretty quickly under scrutiny. Scott's widow, Melissa, strongly denied any possibility of the victims humiliating anyone. She described them as kind and welcoming people who wouldn't intentionally mistreat anyone.
But what about the stolen motorcycle? Was there any evidence to back that up?
None whatsoever. It seemed like a desperate attempt to justify his actions to try and shift blame and portray himself as some sort of vigilante instead of the cold-blooded killer he was.
It's chilling to think that he would fabricate such a story, especially when you consider that his name was actually on that list of potential suspects the investigators had initially disregarded. Had they been more thorough, less fixated on that 3-month window, they might have caught him sooner.
It's a tough reality to face. The missed opportunities in this case are truly mind-boggling. But amidst all the frustration and anger, there's a glimmer of hope in Kayla Brown's survival and courage. Her willingness to speak up led to Cole Hepp's capture, and in a way brought a sense of closure to the families of the Superbike victims.
It's incredible to think that Kayla, who went through so much trauma, would be the one to help bring justice, not only for herself and Charlie, but also for those 4 innocent people killed at Superbike Motorsports all those years ago.
Her story is a testament to the power of the human spirit, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can prevail.
So Cole Hepp confesses to 7 murders, but during his confession, he also bragged about potentially having even more victims out there. It's a chilling thought to know that the full extent of his crimes may never be known.
It's a classic case of a narcissistic killer seeking notoriety, wanting the world to know the depths of his depravity. But in this deep dive, it's important to remember the victims, their families, their friends, and the community that was forever scarred by Cole Hepp's actions.
You're right. Their stories are the ones that truly matter.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore the lasting impact of these crimes and what lessons we can learn from this complex and heartbreaking case. It's hard to even wrap your head around the scale of the tragedy in this case. 4 lives taken in an instant at Superbike Motorsports, then Megan and Johnny Coxey a year later, and then Charlie Carver on Cole Hepp's property. And then there's Kayla Brown, who had to endure months of captivity living with the trauma of what she experienced. It's just overwhelming.
It really makes you think about the ripple effect, the lasting trauma that goes way beyond just those directly involved. Like Noel Lee, the friend who found the bodies at Superbikes, that horrifying image would be seared into his memory forever.
It's difficult to even imagine what he went through. Walking into that scene expecting to see his friends and instead finding something so horrific. And Melissa Scott's widow, she didn't just lose her husband. She was then wrongly accused, publicly scrutinized, and had to raise her son under a cloud of suspicion. Exactly. And this case also highlights the devastating impact on the families of Brian Lucas and Chris Schubert. Their loved ones were taken from them so suddenly, and for years they had to wonder who could have done such a thing. With suspicion even falling on Brian for a while, even though Kohlhepp was eventually brought to justice, it doesn't erase the pain and suffering they went through.
You're right, justice, even when it comes, can't fully heal those wounds. But in a case like this, where so much went wrong, where there were so many missed opportunities, are there any positives we can take away from it?
Well, there is a glimmer of hope in all this darkness. Kohlhepp's capture didn't just close the Superbike case, it prevented him from taking more lives. Who knows how many more people might have been lost if Kayla hadn't survived and shared her story with the authorities.
Her courage is truly remarkable. To not only survive that kind of abuse, but to have the presence of mind to manipulate her captor, to play that dangerous game of survival,
Right.
and then to have the strength to provide the information that cracked the case wide open, it's hard to believe.
Kayla's story reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable horror, the human spirit can endure. And that sometimes justice depends on the incredible bravery of just one person.
So Kohlhepp was given 7 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 60 years with no chance of parole. Some people might argue that he deserves a worse fate, but Scott's son Scotty, who was just a baby when his father was murdered, said he didn't want any more death associated with this case.
It says a lot about Scotty's character, his empathy, that even after everything he's been through, he chooses compassion over revenge. It's a powerful reminder that healing and moving forward can look different for everyone.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. A brutal crime, a botched investigation, a community terrorized, and the incredible resilience of a survivor. But the question that remains is, could the Superbike murders have been solved sooner?
The mishandling of evidence, the narrow focus of the investigation at the start, the missed opportunities. It's hard not to wonder if things could have been different. And that's a difficult thought to grapple with, knowing that perhaps 4 lives could have been saved.
It's a stark reminder of how crucial thoroughness is in investigations, of questioning assumptions, of never giving up hope. The Superbike murders is a case that will stay with us, a testament to both the darkest parts of humanity and the incredible strength of the human spirit.
And as we think about this case, it leaves us with one final question to ponder. In a world flooded with information, how do we separate truth from lies? How do we sharpen our critical thinking skills to question what we're told and seek out different perspectives? This case shows just how important those skills are. It encourages us to be more thoughtful about the information we consume so we can better understand complexities of these kinds of tragedies and work towards a future where they might be prevented.
So as you go about your day, remember the names of those we lost, the families forever changed, and the ripple effects of this crime that shook a small town to its core. And let their stories inspire you to seek truth, demand justice, and never underestimate the power of even one voice to make a difference.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious.